Howdy folks, Jeff Sengstack here. I want to talk about color correction, specifically the chroma part of color correction. When you're doing primary color correction, that is fixing the tonality or chroma of an entire clip within the entire frame, that's called primary color correction. Secondary is when you deal with a part of the image inside the frame, but here we're dealing with the whole image, the whole clip, called primary color correction. The first step is always tonality, brightness and contrast. The second step is chroma, also called color and hue. So we're going to talk about the chroma side in this tutorial. But whenever you talk about color correction, you also always have to talk about doing the tonality correction. Well, we'll take a look at this clip, and I've got several clips here where I've messed with the colors just for the tutorial purposes here. This first one looks like it might have a blue cast to it. But the first order of business, whenever you do any kind of color correction work, be it tonality or chroma, you always open up your scopes. You just have to work with scopes because you can't trust your eyes because everyone's eyes see things differently. So we'll go to Window, Reference Monitor, and that'll open up the scope, this reference monitor scope. Now normally when you open it up the first time you open it up, it'll look like that. It'll be equal to what's in your program monitor, and that's because it's ganged to the program monitor, which is what you want. You want what you see in the scope to be what you see in the program monitor. And then you switch to the scopes, whichever scope you want to use. In this particular case, we're going to use 3 scopes. These are the 3 main color correction scopes. It's the waveform monitor, the waveform scope that shows luma, shows the brightness, the brightness values. And then the other 2 scopes you use when you do the chroma work. This is the vector scope, which shows hue, the color of the clip, and here this is the RGB Parade, which shows individual color channels left to right. Just as the waveform scope shows things left to right, you can see the sky here gets cut off by those trees. And the RGB Parade shows things left to right in chunks of color. This is the red for the entire clip, green for the entire clip, blue for the entire clip. And you can see the sky there as well. And so we'll use the RGB Parade, but the RGB Parade shows something other than hue. It shows something that no engineer has been able to really describe to me. It's kind of a combination of color levels and luma, which creates some issues when you're using it. But people sort of think it shows only the amount of color in a particular color channel, but it doesn't. It shows luma as well. RGB, each color channel has some luma values associated with it. So there are some issues when you use this scope and the effect that works well with it. But nevertheless, they're both valuable, the Vectorscope and the RGB Parade. They're both very helpful when you do color correction. So we'll start by adding the Fast Color Corrector. We're going to use 2 effects here, Fast Color Corrector and RGB Curves. Those are your go-to color correction effects in Premiere Pro for virtually all color correction work. So we'll start with the Fast Color Corrector and add that to this clip, and it shows up in the Effect Controls panel. We'll open it up. We'll bypass this lovely color wheel for now, but we'll get back to it clearly. And first work with the level styles controls to adjust the luma. So we'll switch over to the waveform scope to adjust luma. It needs to be a little bit darker. Bring the black levels, the shadows down to the 0 line, as we've done in the tonality tutorial that I've explained elsewhere. And we'll raise the highlights up to the 100 lines. Now we've taken care of the tonality in terms of the brightness and shadows, the blacks. We have not adjusted the gamma, the midtones, but we're not sweating that right now. I wanted to just deal with the color mainly. So now let's switch over to the color wheel. We need to use the color wheel to fix the color cast to this clip. The color cast is kind of tending towards blue. Let me just confirm that though by looking at the Vectorscope. The Vectorscope shows the overall hue of this particular clip, hue and saturation. The farther these little traces are from the center, that's the more saturated they are. So we've got mainly blue in terms of the colors here, and then kind of neutral in the middle, and sort of tending toward gray in the middle. We want to be able to shift the color away from blue and get it going in more in this direction to sort of neutralize the blue cast here, which this guy clearly demonstrates is present. And the easy thing about this is that the color wheel basically matches the Vectorscope. Here's blue in the Vectorscope, and here's blue in the color wheel. Red up here, the color wheel, green down here, and green down here. So the color wheel matches the Vectorscope. We want to pull the color away from blue. How simple is that? Just grab this little circle here and pull it away from blue. And watch the program monitor as we pull away, and watch the Vectorscope too. We're moving trying to neutralize the color cast by dragging away from blue toward the complement of blue, which is this sort of region between yellow and red, sort of orange, right? And now we've now basically neutralized the blue color cast of this clip, and now turn that clip into this lovely fall foliage, which is how it was shot and how it was intended to be shot. Pretty simple. I want to show you something. If you look at the waveform, as I make these changes to the color, notice that the waveform does not change. We're affecting only hue. We're not touching Luma at all. That's one of the great values of the color wheel. It does not change the Luma. This does not change the brightness. That's a good thing to know. Let's switch over now to the RGB Parade. RGB Parade shows each individual color channel. Let me turn this guy off. And we're going to switch. We're going to use a different effect now. We're going to go over and use the RGB Curves effect, which is the other go-to color correction effect. When you're working with RGB Curves, it's almost always a good idea to have the RGB Parade opened up, because they kind of work hand in hand. But also the Vectorscope is helpful here as well. So the first order of business is I need to take care of the tonality. So I switch over to the waveform scope. Let me take care of the blacks first. Bring the blacks down. There we go. Let me take care of the highlights, bring them up to 100 or so. There we go. Now we've taken care of the tonality more or less. It's not perfect, but that's good enough for the purposes of the demonstration. And now we want to deal with the color cast that's present in this clip, and we'll look at the RGB Parade to see that. You can see we've got, looks like the green and the red channels are both pretty much aligned. You can see this little mid-tone area here for the sky. Here's this bright part of the sky, and this probably this lighter part of this little mountains here are showing. Maybe the green's a little too bright for that particular value. We could really fine-tune that if we wanted to, but the blue is the guy that's way off. So we need to deal with the blue, and the way we deal with the blue first is we bring the blacks, so the dark areas of the blue, down by pulling the blue graph to the right. That brings it down. This will effectively neutralize that blue cast, more or less. And now we need to bring the looks like we need to bring the mid-tones down just a little bit, so I click on the mid-tone level and pull it down a little bit. There we go. And now the highlights are off the chart here. I'm not sure we can fix that because they're just too blue, but we'll bring them down just a bit to kind of compensate. There we go. If I need to bring this midpoint of this green down, if I click on that just a bit here, try to bring that down a bit. This where I'm clicking here is basically equal to, there's 80, see 80 there? And this is about 80 here on the green. If I bring that down just a little bit, just identifying that part of the clip, keeping the top up like that. So now we've, I think, taken care of it. And in doing this, we've changed the Luma of this particular, of this clip. Let me show you how that works. I'll switch over to the waveform. And as I change, let's say I increase the red suddenly. Watch what happens here. See, the Luma changes as well. So we're changing the brightness as we change these graphs. So just keep in mind that after you do all this work and you make these changes using the RGB graphs, you need to go back to the master graph and say, okay, what did I do to mess things up? In this particular case, not that much because we only adjusted the blue highlights down a little bit and touch the green, but we do need to bring the highlights up just a little bit here to compensate for that, and the blacks are okay. So that's how we use the two different effects, Fast Color Corrector and RGB Curves, on this particular clip. Let's move along. Because this particular first clip we had nothing to refer to. We had nothing to say what the right color should be. We just had to kind of eyeball it and use the scopes to help us out. Let's go to this building. This building, we'll go to the Vectorscope, take a look at that. And you can see that it is really tending towards red. Well, I have a little reference item in here, a little gray card that I used when I got this shot. The gray card is lying on the ground. So if I go to the gray card over here at the beginning of the shot, you'll see I'll tilt up to get the shot later. But as I go to the gray card, this is something I can always go back to and say, okay, if the color is wrong, I can use the gray card as a reference. I could make the gray card really gray, and that should compensate for this funny little red color cast in this clip. So I put the gray card there on purpose and then messed up the color so we could do this particular exercise. So there's something in here that we can refer to. We know the color is a certain color. And when you do color balancing in the field, it's always best to use gray, not white, because white can be too reflective and not give you a true color. So use a gray, use some gray card. It doesn't have to be a specific percentage of gray. That's old school for a film. But just any kind of gray will be fine as long as it's gray and not have a color cast to it like blue or something like that. So we've got this guy. We can see the color cast here is shifting towards red and yellow. Let me apply the Fast Color Corrector to that. first order of business is to take care of the Luma. So I'll go back to the whole clip here, because that's a little better way to take care of Luma. Go to the waveform. You can see, wow, it needs to be much brighter and a little bit darker. So let me go down here to the level style controls and bring the shadows down a little bit. There we go. And we need to make this much brighter by bringing the highlights up. Purposely, I'm just underexposed this. There we go. And we could adjust the midtones if we want to, but right now we'll just be happy with that. Now we'll take care of the color cast, and I'll go back to the gray card, the reference card, to use as my source. So I'll go back to the Vectorscope again. I want to neutralize that red color cast and make that card gray. So I can just pull away from that line, pull away from this area here, go the exact opposite direction of the complement here, and pull toward gray, pull toward the blue cyan mid line. And look how that lines up now, and look how the gray has now turned gray, which is confirming that this little guy is in the neutral zone here. That being the case, let me just go forward here in this clip and see how we did. Yeah, that's much better. One little thing though, when you do this, sometimes if the color's way off, you might want to saturate it a little bit. So let me just saturate it, and watch how this guy will move up a little bit away from the center as I add some saturation to this, because saturation is the distance from the center point. So there we go. So that was a pretty easy fix because we had a little reference. It's nice to have a reference. I could do the same process with the RGB curves, but because that's going to be a really long tutorial, if I do that, we'll skip that for the time being. We'll go to the next clip. Next clip here, if I purposely took a white balance off the red wall. So when you are doing your color balance or white balance with your camera, you typically want to point it at something gray. You don't want to point it at something that's a solid color that's not gray. So let me show you what happens. If you point at something that's not gray, then you do a color balance on that color, it'll shift the camera to the complement of that color. So if you watch the Vectorscope here, as I play this clip, and watch when I get the color balance and click the color balance, notice how the Vectorscope shifts from that sort of red overall color cast, because the room is red, to wham, to the complement of red towards cyan. That's what happens when you take the color correction on the wrong color. So now I've done the color cast, the color correction, or excuse me, the color balance on this red wall. Now it's not solid red because it gets some other stuff here as well, but that majority of it's red, so it shifted everything down towards cyan, the complement of red. Now if you look at the clip, you'll see that everybody has this kind of cyan look, and you can see the Vectorscope is saying, whoa, everybody is cyan there. Yuck. Let's add the Fast Color Corrector to that clip. And now you'd think, okay, this will be an easy fix, right? We'll just take the color corrector and we'll just pull toward the complement of cyan. Well, the first order of business is always to take care of the tonality, so we go back to waveform. Looks like we got the blacks pretty well taken care of already. I'll just knock them down just slightly. And the highlights are actually too bright. They're a little above 100. So when they're too bright, use the output slider, not the input slider, and bring them down to 100 to take care of the highlights in the windows and things like that. So now we've got the tonality taken care of. Now let's switch over to the deal with the color cast issues. So I'll switch back to the Vectorscope. Wow, look at that. It's just so blue. I need to pull away from blue. If I do that, I'm going to pull away from blue here to compensate for that. And let's see what happens to the image. It's beginning to change, but it's beginning to look, whoa. As one student described it, looked like 1970s or something. Yee! So that's not always the best thing to do. When you're working with the color wheel, you're changing all the colors at once, and sometimes it just doesn't really work that well. Well, in this particular case, we have this little reference that we can use. We don't have a gray card here, but we do have this tablecloth. I'm thinking the tablecloth might be something we can use and try to make the tablecloth gray, and that might fix things. So I'm going to click on this clip again. I've already applied a crop to it. There's the crop, and the crop is to that tablecloth. If you just look at the crop has these little 4 points to it. You can always adjust the crop. And I cropped it down to that tablecloth to say that should be gray. And I'm looking at the color cast here, and it's saying, no, it's cyan. So let's go back to the Fast Color Corrector and see if we can, if we try to neutralize that tablecloth by pulling away from it. Notice how we're doing that. And if you really need to pull a lot, you can use this larger, called like this gross control as opposed to the fine control up here. And we've neutralized it. That looks, you know, it's getting toward the gray anyways, at least according to the scope. If I turn off the crop, I don't think you're going to be happy with the results. Let's just see what happened there. So the same problem again. So even if we try to use that lovely tablecloth as our reference, sometimes the Fast Color Corrector is not going to be our best friend when we try to do that kind of work. So I'm going to turn off the Fast Color Corrector. I'm going to do RGB Curves instead. I'm going to crop it again. This time I'm going to switch over to the RGB Parade, as we do when we work with RGB Curves. And look at, you can see the individual color channels for that little section there. We need to bring the green down a little bit. Maybe leave the blue alone and bring the red way up. So I'm going to click on this guy, go to RGB Curves. First order of business, though, is whenever we do this work is to always do our tonality. So I'll turn off the crop, take care of tonality by switching back to the waveform scope and saying, okay, we need to bring the blacks down to 0. Very good. And bring the brights down as well. That's how you do it inside the master control here. Now that we've taken care of that, turn the old crop back on again and see if we can fix this little guy using the RGB Parade. Okay, first order of business, looks like we need to bring the green down a little bit to kind of match the blue. Now we need to bring the red way up. So we'll start by just taking the midtones way up here on Mr. Red there. Let's see if we can get a little bit more. So there we go. That about does it maybe. It looks like the blue highlights are a bit, the blue and the green highlights might be a bit much, so we bring them down just a touch. Maybe down a little bit, each one a little bit. There we go. I think if you look at them left to right, it looks like we might have taken care of business here. Let's just, the proof is in the pudding though. Let's see what's behind the curtain here. And turn off the crop. Oh my goodness, is that better or what? So look at how RGB Curves helped us out so much more than Fast Color Corrector. So again, like when there's a huge color shift, many times RGB Curves is your go-to tool. But what happens when you use RGB Curves, I mentioned before, is it does affect the overall luma. So let me go back and look at the waveform and see if we need to fix anything. Oh, yeah, see, it made it a little bit too bright, and that's the only thing we need to fix. Let's go back to the master tonality and bring the brightness down just a touch to compensate for all this stuff, because we lifted the red so much. We had made it too bright. But now we're done. Hey, how about that? Pretty cool. Let's move on down the line here to this little composite that I made of 3 different images. The purpose of this little thing that I set up here is I want to show you that skin tone is basically the same no matter what your nationality. We are all the same hue. What's different is that maybe we're not quite the same brightness, the same luma, but we're essentially all the same hue. And you can use skin tone as a way to do your chroma part of your color balancing. Let me show you how that works. I'll start by looking at the person here on the bottom track. I'll turn on the crop that I put for him. Let me switch over to the Vectorscope to see how this, to show how this works. Vectorscope shows that we're tending towards this particular direction, but if I just put on the crop for just his skin tone, you'll see that his skin tone lies on this little line here, sometimes euphemistically or incorrectly called the skin tone line. It's actually referred to as it's actually the eye line. It's a calculated value, but which happens to match skin tone. So skin tone basically falls along this line, and it needs to be away from center. So right around there is proper skin tone for that particular person. Now let's change nationalities and see what happens here. If we go to the next person, here's kind of a Western European stuff. Put the crop on for her skin. Oops, got the wrong person selected. There we go. Now we got it. Notice her skin tone again falls right on that line. Go to the next person. Select her. Put on the crop for her. She's Chinese. And notice her skin tone is also right on that line. It's one of those really, I don't know, this is maybe a cultural thing. We all have to talk about different skin colors, but in fact we're all the same hue, basically. So you can use that. You can use the knowledge that we're all basically the same hue when you make color corrections by, let's say, looking at this particular clip here. So here, if I look at this clip, if you look at the Vectorscope, the overall color hue is tending towards skin tone. That's because the walls are red, and if you look maybe around the hair there, you see things are maybe kind of tending towards blue. So let me put on a crop there. And on her skin tone, if you see the skin tone, here, look at it. It's not touching this line. It's down here in the neutral zone. That's because there's a blue cast to this clip, and the blue, which is down here, is is basically neutralizing the skin tone. The fact that it's a blue cast, and blue, sky blue being the complement of skin tone, is neutralizing the blue and making the skin basically gray. If I click on the crop and drag it to her hair, which should be yellow, it's tending towards blue, and that's the bright part of the hair. Over here in the where it's a little bit darker, you can see it's basically gray. So this blue has neutralized things that would normally be yellow or orange. So it's clearly a blue cast to this particular clip, and we can use skin tone then as a way to do a color correction. There's no gray card here that we can refer to, or a gray tablecloth, but we do have skin tone to refer to. So let me apply the Fast Color Corrector to that little guy. There you go. And we're going to work only in this little zone here. We're going to look at this particular Vectorscope, and we're going to try to pull the skin tone so it gets saturated enough that it touches this line, and that should compensate for this blue cast. So we'll open up the Fast Color Corrector. I didn't do the tonality in this thing, so let me take care of that first by turning off the crop. We'll do tonality first for Fast Color Corrector. Let's fix that by going first and looking at the waveform. Okay, we got to bring the blacks down a little bit. Make sure you get a full contrast ratio right about there, and bring the highlights up to 100. They're almost touching 100, so bring them up using the input slider, and there we go. Now we've taken care of the full contrast ratio. Now we're going to go over to the color wheel and switch back to the Vectorscope. We want to put on the crop, so we're dealing only with skin tone, because that'll be our reference. We need to bring the skin tone up so that it adds enough saturation and pulls it away from cyan to actually make it look like skin tone instead of someone's got gray skin. We're pulling it away, keep pulling until we get to right about where it starts touching the bottom of this little reticule, it's called. I think that might be maybe too far, but we'll take a look. Now the proof is in the pudding, so we'll reveal what's behind the curtain, and oh, well, heck, that's much better. It might be a little bit overdone, might be a little too much, but we can just pull it back a little bit. We use skin tone as a reference, and suddenly things are easier to do. And we can do if we use skin tone with RGB curves, we won't be able to use the RGB Parade, but let's just try that. Let's show you how that works. I'll turn off Fast Color Corrector, put on RGB Curves. And now the RGB Parade won't help us here, because it's, oops, I grabbed the wrong one. There we go. The RGB Parade won't help us here because we're looking specifically at skin tone, and there's no like skin tone line for RGB Parade, because it's just, you know, how do you find skin tone with those three different values there? So this time we use the Vectorscope with RGB Parade, with the RGB Curves. We can do the same thing. We can see that. Okay, let's open up the curves for those guys. Let's fix tonality first by switching over to the waveform and bringing the blacks down a bit, shadows down a bit, there we go, and bringing the highlights up a touch to 100. There we go. And now we want to figure out how we're going to compensate to fix the skin tone using the Vectorscope. And we're going to put on the crop to do that. Now we see, okay, the way we need to do it is by removing blue and some green. Notice that this is tending down here towards cyan. So we need to remove some green and some blue. So we're taking some blue out. That's already beginning to move the traces up a bit, but I'm moving them to the left a bit too, not where we want to go. We want to pull some green out now. Move that more towards skin tone. There we go. And that may have taken care of business for us. We might want to add a little bit of red. Just a touch maybe. Maybe that's too much. And now let's turn off the crop and see how we did. Good. Pretty darn good. And again, if we look back at the waveform monitor, it will have changed the luma on there, but not much. It's pretty close. So I think we're pretty much set. So you can see you can use either one, and you can use the Vectorscope when using RGB curves, especially when you're dealing with skin tone as your reference. But I hope you can see that the Chroma side of color correction, you basically work with RGB curves or the Fast Color Corrector, and you need to use the Vectorscope and RGB Parade monitors to help you out. And always, before you do any kind of chroma or color correction work, always do your tonality first. And that's how it works here in Premiere Pro.